to that CPU. So it's how we get information into the system. And then perceptions is what do we do with that information? How do we create, quote unquote, our reality? That CPU. So it's how we get information. Hold on just a second. Okay, there we go. Sorry, I didn't know that sound was on. And so sensations is how we get information into the system. You know, wavelengths for sight, chemicals for smell, sound waves for sound, um, and whatnot. So then perceptions is how our brain and with our involvement create reality. Okay. And so if we were just to give some quick definitions, sensations is the process of receiving information. Okay. And perception is the notion that this is what then organizes it and interprets it. Okay. And so this is our interpretation of what we're sensing. Okay. And then there's a fancy word known as transduction that's related to sensation process of transforming physical energy into electrochemical information that our brain then can use to process and work with. Okay. One of the famous philosophical roots of sensation perceptions is if a tree falls in the woods with no one around, does it exist? Does it make sound? Does it do all those things? And there's two kind of arguments on this. One is yes, it does exist because I can close my eyes and I can imagine it happening. And since that is the seat of reality, that tree does exist and can fall in the woods. On the more materialistic side is if there's not a sensory device to sense the tree falling, then no, it doesn't exist because without a sensing device, it doesn't exist. And this is kind of like, okay, well, this is kind of what makes sense to a lot of people, right? Is that we really don't think about what's happening, let's say, in the other side of the world, because it doesn't exist within our sensory system. So we're not curious about what someone's doing two towns down the road or something like that. So just kind of an interesting kind of philosophical part of this to kind of if you want to have a night of intellectual philosophical argument, it's kind of an interesting thing to think about. Now, the reasons why sensations and perceptions are separated is because there's not a one-to-one association between what we sense in our environment and the perception we create. Okay. And probably the best example of this is vision. All right. If we were to take a camera and take a picture of the image that is projected onto the back of your eye, even with the best glasses or the best um, contact lenses that makes it so everything is in focus. If we took a picture, the picture on the back of your eye would look similar to what you experience when there's a heavy rainfall on your car windshield and your wipers aren't working. That's actually the acuity of the what's being projected on the back of your eye. The other thing about vision is that when the nerves that the sensing nerves that exit the eye exit right in the middle of the eye. Okay. And in that exit, there are no sensing nerves. All right. So if there was a one-to-one association between vision and what we perceive, when we see, it should look really kind of foggy, like heavy rain is on the windshield, and there should be two dark spots, two blind spots in our visual field. But what happens is through perception, our brain looks at what it thinks should be in that those dark spots and fills it in, and it clears up. It kind of does the windshield wiper thing and clears up the image to what we expect we should see. Okay. Probably the best way to understand this too is through things like visual illusions. Okay. And so in this kind of class, I always like to play a video done by Ted on vision, but I do need to, I forgot to hit the sound button when I went in here. Hold on just a second. Okay. Share. Okay, so we're going to watch this video, and again, it's about understanding what we see is not always what we expect. Okay, so let's take a look at this video.
We're going to talk about a new lecture just for TED, and I'm going to show you some illusions that we've created for TED, and I'm going to try and relate this to happiness. And what I was thinking about with happiness is what gives happiness, or happiness which I equate with joy, in my particular area. And I think there's something very fundamental, and I was thinking about this. And it's in terms of both illusions and movies that we go see and jokes and magic shows, is that there's something about these things where our expectations are violated in some sort of pleasing way. You go see a movie and it has an unexpected twist, something that you didn't expect, and you find a joyful experience. You look at the sort of illusions in my book and it's not as what you'd expect, and there's something joyful about it. And it's the same thing with jokes and all these sort of things. So what I'm going to try and do in my lecture is go a little bit further and see if I can violate your expectations in a pleasing way. I mean, sometimes expectations that are violated are not pleasant, but I'm going to try to do it in a pleasant way, in a very primal way, so I can make the audience here happy. So I'm going to show you some ways that we can violate your expectations. First of all, I want to show you a particular illusion here. I want you, first of all, when it pops up on the screen, to notice that the two holes are perpendicular to each other. These are all perceptual tricks. These are real objects that I'm going to show you. Now, I'm going to show you how it was done. I've looped the film here so you can get a very interesting experience. I want you to see how this illusion's constructed, and it's going to rotate, so you see that it's an inside-out thing. Now watch as it rotates back, how quickly your perception snaps. Okay, now watch it as it rotates back again, and this is a very bright audience. All right, see if you can stop it from happening, even though you know 100% it's true. Bang, you can't undo it. What does that tell you about yourselves? We're going to do it again. No doubt about it. See if you can stop it from happening. No, it's difficult. And we can violate your expectations in a whole variety of ways about representation, about shape, about color, and so forth, and it's very primal. And it's an interesting question to ponder why these things, we find these things joyful. Why would we find that joyful? So here's something that Lionel did a while ago. I like these sort of little things like this. Again, this is not an optical trick. This is what you would see. In other words, it's not a camera cut. It's a perceptual trick. Okay, we can violate your expectations about shape.
How does that work?
We can violate your expectations on representation, what an image represents. What do you see here? How many of you here see dolphins? Raise your hand if you see dolphins. Okay, those people who have raised their hands afterwards, the rest of the audience, go talk to them, all right? Actually, this is the best example of priming by experience that I know. If you are a child under the age of 10 who haven't been ruined yet, you will look at this image and see dolphins. Now, some of you adults here are saying, what dolphins, what dolphins? But in fact, if you reverse the figure ground, in other words, the dark areas here, I forgot to ask for a pointer, but if you reverse, you'll see a whole series of little dolphins. By the way, if you're also a student at Caltech, they tend also to just see the dolphins. It is based on experience. Now, something like this can be used, because this is, after all, a talk about design, too. This was done by Saatchi and Saatchi, and they actually got away with this ad in Australia. So if you look at this ad for a beer, all those people are in sort of provocative positions, but they got it passed and actually won the Clio Awards. So it's funny how you can do these things. Remember that sort of... This is a joke I did, all right? When the Florida ballot was going around, you know, count the dots for Gore, count the dots for Bush, count them again. You can violate your expectations about experience. Here is an outside water fountain that I created with some friends of mine, but you can stop the water in drops and then actually make all the drops levitate. So this is something that we're building for, you know, amusement parks and that kind of stuff. Now let's take a static image. Can you see this? Do you see the middle section moving down and the outer sections moving up? It's completely static. It's a static image. How many people see this illusion? But it's completely static. All right, now it's interesting that when we look at an image, we see, you know, color, depth, texture, and you can look at this whole scene and analyze it. You can see the woman is in closer than the wall and so forth, but the whole thing is actually flat. It's painted, it's trompe-l'oeil. And it was such a good trompe-l'oeil that people got irritated when they tried to talk to the woman, and she wouldn't respond. Now, you can make design mistakes, like this building in New York, so that when you see it from this side, it looks like the balconies tilt up, and when you walk around to the other side and look, it looks like the balconies go down. So there are cases where you have mistakes in design that incorporate illusions. Or you take this particular unretouched photograph. Now, interestingly enough, I get a lot of emails from people who say, is there any perceptual difference between males and females? And I really say no. I mean, women can navigate through the world just as well as males can. And why wouldn't they? However, this is the one illusion that women can consistently do better than males in matching which head, because they rely on fashion cues. They can match the hat. Okay, now getting to a part, I want to show design in illusions. I believe that the first example of illusions being used purposely was by Da Vinci in this anamorphic image of an eye, so that when you saw from one little angle was like this. And this little technique got popular in the 16th century, the 17th century to disguise hidden meanings where you could flip the image and see it from one little point of view like this. So these are early incorporations of illusions brought to its sort of high point with Hans Holbein's ambassadors. Hans Holbein worked for Henry VIII. This was hung on a wall where you walked down from a stair and you could see this hidden skull. All right, now I'm going to show you some designers who work with illusions to give that element of surprise. One of my favorite is Scott Kim. I worked with Scott to create some illusions for TED that I hope you will enjoy. We have one here on TED and happiness. Okay, now, Arthur hasn't talked yet, but his is going to be a delightful talk. And he has some of his really fantastic machines outside. And so Scott created this wonderful tribute to Arthur Ganson. Well, there's analog and digital. Thought that was appropriate here. And figure goes to ground. And for the musicians, and of course, since happiness, we want joy to the world. Now, another great designer, he's very well known in Japan, Shigeo Fukuda, all right? And he just builds some fantastic things. This is simply amazing. This is a pile of junk that when you view it from one particular angle, you see its reflection in the mirror as a perfect piano. Pianist. Transforms to a violinist. This is really wild. This is an assemblage of forks, knives, and spoons and various cutlery welded together. Look at a shadow of a motorcycle. You learn something in the sort of thing that I do, which is there are people out there with a lot of time on their hands. Ken Knowlton does wonderful composite images, like creating Jacques Cousteau out of seashells, unretouched seashells, but just by rearranging them. He did Einstein out of dice, because after all, Einstein said God does not play dice with the universe. Bert Herzog out of unretouched keyboards. Will Short's crossword puzzle. John Cedarquist does these wonderful trompe-l'oeil cabins. Now I'm going to skip ahead because I'm sort of running ahead. I want to show you quickly what I've created, some new type of illusions. I've done something with taking the Pixar type illusions. So you see these kids, they're the same size here, running down the hall. The two tabletops are the same size. They're looking out two directions at once, you have a larger piece fitting in within smaller. And that's something for you to think about, all right? So you see larger pieces fitting in within smaller pieces here? Does everyone see that? Which is impossible. You can see the two kids are looking out simultaneously out of two different directions at once. Now, can you believe these two tabletops are the same size and shape? They are. So if you measured them, they would be. And as I say, those two figures are identical in size and shape. All right? And it's interesting by doing these, this in this sort of rendered fashion, how much stronger the illusions are. In any case, I hope this has brought you a little joy and happiness. And if you're interested in seeing more cool effects, see me outside. Be happy to show you lots of things.
All right. I always like starting a lecture on sensations and perceptions, looking at these different types of illusions and how we come about them, and just really brings home this idea that what we construct in our brain, what we're seeing, isn't always a direct reflection of the actual thing that we're viewing. So, um, kind of bring that point. In this, we want to recognize that we have two really types of processes that go on when we create the reality that we hear, see, smell, taste, and feel. Okay. And this comes up with bottom-up processing versus top-down processing. Okay. Bottom-up processing is when the sensation system really is providing the majority of the information needed to take an action. So a good example of when a sensation system has kind of said, hey, we need to do some type of action, um, is when there's an emergency. So for example, if you put your hand on a hot stove, you're not going to kind of sit there and see what's going to happen with your hand as it sits there and burns. You're going to instantly take your hand off of the burner. Okay, this is when the sensation system is the primary thing that is going to drive behavior. However, pain is not always the same between individuals. Our expectations of pain also play an important role in this, and this is bottom down processing. So you may have heard in general, for example, females are more tolerant of pain than men. And in general, that is true. It doesn't work out in all spaces of the world or all spaces of men and women. But on average, women do seem to tolerate pain more than men do. Okay. Mainly because there's that expectation of pain, usually dealing with childbirth and those types of things. We also know that people experience pain less when they're touching someone they love or holding their hand. Um, and so that's all top-down processing where what we're experiencing dictates to what level of pain we're going to experience. Okay. So recognizing these two processes is important because we can also talk about subliminal stimulation. Okay. Subliminal stimulation is when a stimulus is presented just below the level of perception. Um, and it determines it can that actually influence behavior. Okay. um, and this got really popular in the 50s and 60s when there was a mind control movement, all of those different kind of pseudo ideas. And a lot of research was actually done in grocery stores where the idea was is at a subliminal level, let's say you subliminally under someone's awareness say, buy more Coca-Cola, buy more Coca-Cola, buy more Coca-Cola. And the question is, does that influence a person's purchasing behavior? And the answer is when you do a cognitive message like that, no, it doesn't work. Subliminal messaging does not work. However, when a subliminal message is sent that is targeted towards an emotion, and then that emotion is tied to a product, it does tend to influence purchasing behavior. So let's say under the level of sublimination, they do a song, don't worry, be happy, happy, and they try to put you in this emotional state of happiness subliminally. And then you go into then you're walking through the store and there's a sign on the Coca-Cola that says, only happy people drink Coca-Cola. Okay. That tends to influence purchasing behavior when the emotion is tied to the desired behavior. And this is also why in modern times most stores don't use subliminal messaging or whatnot, but most stores, especially big chains, tend to play music where when their target consumer was at the age of around 11 to 15 teenage years, because those teenage years are when we experience music, usually experience music, and we used it to bring joy and understanding, and we that's usually our teen years is when we're really into music. Okay. And so, for example, Walmart, if a Walmart is playing what Walmart Corporation wanted Walmart to play, they would that their target individuals that spend the most money at Walmart are individuals between the age of 45 to 60. So that's their target range. All right. So the music, the stock music that they tend to play at Walmart would be music from let's do these years. So uh 45 to 55, subtract, let's say 10 years. So let's say 35. So 35 years ago, they would be playing music from the 1990 to about 2000 era. Okay, and that's the music they play. If you go into, for example, a Hot Topics, they'll play music based upon their demographic, which tends to be teens to early to mid 20s. Okay, because they found that, yes, indeed, that actually increases sales. If you kind of wonder about this, some experiments that students have done in my classes in the past is when they go to their favorite store, instead of listening to the music that they pipe through the systems, they would listen to a really boring lecture or something with their headphones. And when I've done this in classes before, they actually started spending less, anywhere from 20 to 40% less money at their favorite store than they did before when they were just listening to the stock music at that store. It's kind of a interesting experiment if you want to reduce your purchasing, how much you buy at one of your favorite stores. Try that and see if it helps. But anyway, so subliminal message, does it work? It works on modifying emotions. And this does explain why sometimes things like music can put us in a really good mood. This is the reason why sometimes we're experiencing emotion that we're not sure why we're experiencing it, because it's probably the sensations that are coming at us are just below that level of threshold where we can consciously hear them, see them, feel them, those types of things. So, some kind of thought projects to think about. So subliminal message. Okay, the next thing that can influence behavior that what that really has nothing to do with the current context. And we often wonder, why the heck did I do that? The other one is something called the priming effect. Okay. And this is when earlier experiences influence current behavior and current experiences. Okay. So this actually, this picture here actually comes from research I did way back when I was an undergraduate. And we kind of did kind of a where we had individuals come into the lab, and they first there were signed up for what they thought was a totally unrelated experiment where we said reading certain things can influence your physical activity. Okay. And so we randomly assigned individuals into two basic groups. One group read a story about the great outdoors and being outdoors and, in the wilderness, those types of things. The other individuals read a book about inner city life. Okay. And then we had them do some type of bogus physical activity, like go walk around the track, as many times as they could before they got exhausted and whatnot. And they would come back and they said, okay, I've completed 5 laps, and here's your credit for coming and attending the experiment. And then we would initiate the second part of the experiment and say, we really appreciated that you helped us with this research. Do you have like 5, 10 minutes to help us with another piece of research that we're looking at? Okay. And many said yes because, hey, maybe get a few bucks or some credits in one of their classes for doing these experiments. And we brought them into a room where this picture was displayed for 1.5 seconds. And then we asked them to write down what they saw in the picture. So this would appear for 1.5 seconds, and then they would sit and write what they saw. Okay. And I think this is one of the things about the power of priming effects is the students who read the unrelated story about inner city life. This campfire became one of those barrel fires, you see in movies and stuff around the homeless camps. There's a barrel with a fire in it. This guy became a black guy, and a lot of people noted that he was holding a gun. Everyone was wearing hoodies. And you see this dog right here. That dog disappeared. No one reported seeing the dog. Okay. Now, on the other hand, the people who previously read the story about the great outdoors got this picture pretty accurate. None of these guys were wearing hoodies in their description. They identified this as an older guy with a white beard, and he was holding a drink, a cup of something. Most of them recognized the dog. And most didn't turn this into a barrel fire. It was a campfire just like this one. Okay. And this is an example of how earlier experiences can influence physical experiences of different images later in the day. Okay. If I wanted to simplify this kind of conversation about priming, I'm willing to bet that most of us, not all, if we're having a really bad morning, maybe we spill our coffee on it, we keep getting cut off in traffic, we get the kids to school late, we walk into work and the boss is in a bad mood. And that earlier experiences, we tend to, if you're anything like me, tend to kind of have a bad day and tend to see things in more of a negative light than a positive light. However, if you're like me, when you have that perfect morning, the coffee tasted just right, the right temperature, the kids were in agreement in getting them to school on time, the boss was in a good mood, we tend to experience and perceive the day in a better light or in a more positive way. Okay. And yes, we've measured this and it's true. Or there's actually evidence for it. I shouldn't say it's true. In science, there's no truth. But, anyways, so this is another example of how earlier experiences can influence what we actually think we're seeing or we're actually experiencing during the day. Okay. All right. And I think, what time is it? Been getting done early lately. Um, I want to leave this idea of psychophysics for Thursday because we're going to get into how our vision system and hearing actually gets physical energy into our system and how it processes it. And this fits better with this discussion about psychophysics, about how acute is our sensation systems. Okay, so I am actually going to stop here, and I want to end with just a kind of a thought project again, relating the difference between sensations and perceptions. Um, if you've ever looked at a sunrise or a sunset and you see the sun and it looks big and it's huge, and then you take your phone and you take a picture of it and it becomes very small. Which is more accurate, what you're experiencing or what your camera is experiencing? And this is the idea that I want to leave you with is, and to kind of think about when you think about how our brain constructs our reality. Technically, the sun is closest to us when the sun is directly above us. It's actually furthest away from us at sunset and sunrise. So if there was a one-to-one association with what we are sensing and what we're perceiving, the sun should look really, really small at sunrise and sunset and look bigger when it's in the middle of the sky shining down on us. So, kind of a thought project I would encourage you to kind of think about when we're thinking about these different things. And the beautiful part about it is, and what I love about studying sensation and perceptions, is it really explains how two people can hear the same argument. They could see the same visual thing. They can look at the world and have the same amount of stimulation, the same exact stimulation, but they will perceive it and experience it slightly, or in some cases, largely different based upon their experience, based upon what they've learned that objects should represent and begin. And that's what creates an incredibly diverse experience for us all. And I would encourage, based on these types of lectures and stuff, to kind of get in the shoes of other people when they're perceiving something differently than you are, because you get to enter their world for a while and understand what they experience, which is a very cool thing. But I'm going to